Let's embark on a ride into the valley of love and loss. But if love is a bet we have lost, what hope do we have for today? What is there to claim? Immortality? Browning is a supermortal poet to the extent of immortality. He celebrates failure upon horseback. So buckle up and get ready to be swept away by this emotional roller coaster as we explore the depths of love, life and loss in Robert Browning's timeless masterpiece. We have discussed at length on Victorian poetry, Robert Browning. We have done My Last Touches. So we already have covered a lot, so as to speak of background and Robert Browning's life. But I think if you are viewing this video as the first video of Browning on this channel, then I'll just give you some heads up regarding who Browning was and the time when he was writing. Robert Browning was an English poet and a playwright who wrote during the Victorian times. He was born in London and his father educated him at home. His father was a scholar and a lover of literature. So automatically from the very beginning of his life, he had this exposure to different kinds of literatures. And that had an influence in his later writing too. His first collection was published anonymously around 1833 and people didn't notice him much. He fell in love with this woman called Elizabeth Barrett and they got married. Elizabeth's father hated her for that and she had to get away from him. Their married life is celebrated as one of the most successful amorous ones in the history of literary couples. Elizabeth Barrett was also a poet. In fact, during their lifetime, it was Elizabeth Barrett Browning who was actually the famous poet. Browning's popularity grew mostly during the modern times. Personally, I believe that Browning was born before his time, almost like William Blake was. So, of course, people during his time, Victorian people who were so conservative, they hated any kind of drastic experimentation. And Browning was a master of showcasing what human beings can be and what human consciousness is made up of. In this poem, we will be looking at one of his famous dramatic monologues, which was also published in his collection Men and Women. And I want you to just have some basic idea about this literary form called dramatic monologue. Now, drama and poetry, they belong to the different kinds of genres. Drama is something where you see things happening in front of you. It's performance, which is technically called mimesis. And poetry is diegesis, we can say. It's something which you read, something which is narrated to you. So they are essentially different things. So when they are brought together, there's a kind of a peculiar combination and it's not very easy to handle this combination. Dramatic monologue is like a poem which is written as if somebody is speaking on stage. So it's a monologue, it's by a single speaker and there is usually a silent listener and this speaker is speaking to the silent listener and of course to the readers as well. What is the other quality that is important here? It has to be something very dramatic, which means that it has to be a situation where this character is either talking about some important decision that he has to make or has already made. There is a psychological element to it where we see a very complex mind expressing the inner fears, anxieties, hopes, and somehow there is a tendency to justify one's position. Somehow this narrator figure, this speaker, will be giving an idea about why that person is doing what he or she is doing or thinking at the moment. Another key aspect which you need to keep in mind in context of dramatic monologues is that the speaker is not the poet. It's not like Wordsworth talking about daffodils here. So here you have a persona created in front of you. That persona can be an imaginary one or something which the poet has invented, or it might be somebody who belongs to our history books or common mythologies, figures with whom you are familiar. So that narrative persona is created by the poet as a dramatic character. So there is an element of objectivity. So we have these very weird characters, especially in the dramatic monologues written by Robert Browning. And perhaps a Victorian sensibility, which was keen on censoring anything which is not suitable to its conservative mindset, was not very enthusiastic about Browning. Let's come to this poem in particular. Here we'll see how this dramatic moment is created through the first 3 stanzas, and then how the psychological importance of that moment is established through the rest of the poem. So the focus of this poem is how that single moment leads to a lot of speculation, a lot of ideas coming out of the mouth of this narrator, or rather not the mouth of this narrator, he is actually thinking them. So we can say this is more of an interior monologue technique rather than a person speaking out, which we find in dramatic monologue like My Last Touches. There the Duke actually speaks and we can hear him talking. So now let's look at the poem. I said, then dearest, since it's so, there is no context given here. If you have read My Last Duchess, you must have noticed that he gives a setup there. He talks about a place where this happens. Here we don't have any specific name of any place. So it's more universal, you can say, in its implication. So this person, I, is of course not the poet. It's an imaginary person, and since there is no mention of any name in the title, therefore we do not have any name for this person. For example, in case of Andrea del Sarto, in case of Raleigh Polypi, we know who the speaker is. In case of My Last Duchess, we know it's the Duke of Ferrara speaking. Here we do not have any name. So we can assume that it's all man and no man kind of a situation here. So this man is saying, we are assuming it's a man, I said then, dearest, since 'tis so, since now at length my fate I know, since nothing all my love avails, since all my life seemed meant for fails, since this was written and needs must be. So this man is building up a situation in front of us, and this recurrent use of since in the very beginning of these successive lines, this is called anaphora. It's a figurative device. So we see there is a build up of a moment, and there is somewhat a kind of establishing the premises where this person is giving us the kind of background on what has happened. So what has happened? He's talking to his dearest, so it's his beloved, and he's saying, since now at length my fate I know. So something is told to him which has really been kind of a shock for him, sad thing for him, and he knows that his fate is sealed now. Okay, since nothing all my love avails, so he has no hope for getting back anything for the kind of love he has. So there is hopelessness, there is desperation here. Since all my life seemed meant for fail, so whatever was valuable for him ends here. So we understand by now that this is a moment of breakup or heartbreak. Since this was written and needs must be, so he accepts his fate. He's not the kind of person who would complain and sulk in the corner. He is accepting what this lady has to say. And then he says, my whole heart rises up to bless your name in pride and thankfulness. So either this man is being extremely chivalrous, like those Petrarch and sonnet writers who celebrated unrequited love, or he's talking about the moments they already had shared together and feeling thankful for them. So there is this amicable acceptance of fate, and he wants to end it on a peaceful note, it seems. Take back the hope you gave. I claim only a memory of the same. So he wants to tell her that you can have your life away from me, but you cannot take away the past from me. So the claim on you is the claim on the time we have spent together. And he is thankful that he has the memories with him. And he looks for something else too. And this beside, if you will not blame, this person is extremely apologetic at times. If you will not blame, you'll leave for one more last ride with me. So he wants to go on a ride with her. It's like a last date, he proposes. And hold on a second, he uses this word more. And that's weird because it's grammatically not very correct, is it? Had he said that I wish to have one last ride with you, that is fine. Or if I wish to have one more ride with you, that is also fine. But one more last ride means, what does he want to say? Does he mean that they always have these last rides and they make up and they get into this relationship again? So he's hoping to have this last ride again to see if they end up together again or not. We don't know. We can only speculate. But Browning is tricky, And if you have read My Last Duchess, Porphyria's Lover, by now you are very scared and you don't want this lady to accept this proposal because you are very sure by now that this man is going to kill this woman. This is a different story altogether. This is not the same person who speaks in Porphyria's Lover, the same person who speaks in My Last Duchess. This is the beauty of Browning's monologues. Each monologue gives you a different character. And the character who speaks here is so different that this difference establishes the objectivity that Browning had, which I believe very rarely poets have, unless you are William Shakespeare. So this is not going to be a poem about jealous rage, about heartbreak and devastation. This is going to be a passionate poem with a touch of philosophy because this man is a calm person. Then he describes the reaction to his proposal. My mistress bent that brow of hers, those deep dark eyes where pride demurs, when pity would be softening through. So two emotions function in her eyes. On one hand, her pride is stopping her from accepting his proposal, and on the other hand, she is feeling pity because, well, they were in a relationship and she has this natural feelings for him. So these two emotions, they contend together and this is reflected in her eyes. And certainly this man is very nervous at this moment, and there is this dramatic build-up of tension here or suspense here. Fixed me a breathing while or two. So he held his breath with life or death in the balance. Right, the blood replenished me again. So when we hear this, we know that she has said yes. He was holding his breath and then suddenly he feels relieved. This means she has maybe nodded her head, because in Browning's monologues, the listener never speaks. So she doesn't say anything. She maybe nods her head and he is so happy and excited. My last thought was at least not vain. I and my mistress, side by side, shall be together, breathe and ride. So one day more am I deified. Who knows but the world may end tonight. So he is planning to ride with her side by side. So How is that going to be? They are going to get on two different horses and the horses would ride side by side. Like they can't sit on a horse side by side. She can sit in front of him and then that won't be side by side. They can of course get in a carriage, horse-driven carriage, and get a ride. Nobody said they're going to go on horseback. He's only talking about a ride here. And Browning is mischievously silent about explaining these things to us. Anyway, the reaction is positive, and seeing that, he feels that he is deified. Deified means he is turned into a god. Why? Because she is a goddess. So in her presence, he feels like he is promoted to a deity, okay, a divine figure. So he can remain a divine figure for one more evening because he gets to stay with her for the last time. And he feels that it won't matter if the world ends, and who knows, like this might be the end of the world tonight. And then if there is nothing tomorrow, nothing that exists, it won't matter if we are away or together. Hush. See, the dramatic tone continues. It's as if he is talking to us. Hush. If you saw some western cloud, all billowy bosomed, overbowed by many benediction suns and moons and evening stars at once. What is he talking about? He's talking about clouds at sunset. And when there are clouds during the sunset, which are billowy bosomed, which means he's comparing them to the figure of women, round and swelling. And when is the time of sunset and there is a flicker of moon there somewhere, maybe some stars starting to twinkle too, then that cloud is blessed by sunlight, moonlight, starlights. I mean, a poet can imagine it that way. So he is capturing a moment of twilight, and usually twilights are sad moments. It's like the end of the day, and sad poems are written during the twilight, but nobody has seen a cloud as a blessing here during the sunset, that it gets all kinds of blessings. So a moment like twilight, which is otherwise seen as a moment of sadness, here we see a kind of glorification of that moment. So this cloud is filled with blessings, benedictions. Whose blessings? Suns, moons, evening stars at once. And so you, looking and loving best, conscious grew. So when this woman, she was looking at those clouds, she looked at them with certain kind of intensity. And there was a connection, as if with that beautiful cloudy sky and this woman. So much so that it felt as if she was getting elevated to that level. And so you, looking and loving best, conscious grew. Your passion drew cloud, sunset, moonrise, starshine too. So the cloud is capable to draw blessings from sun, moon and star. This woman is capable to draw blessing from that cloud itself. And so this whole combination of benedictions shine upon her. Down on you, near and yet more near, till flesh must fade, for heaven was here. So she was almost angelic at this moment. So he was not looking at her body at the moment, he was looking at the spirit escaping from the body. Thus leant she and lingered, joy and fear. Thus lay she a moment on my breast. So it was a sentimental moment for her, and she wanted to maybe rest her head a while on his chest and get an embrace. But what I want you to notice is the word moment in the last line of the stanza. And this moment happens to be the key word in this poem. Joy and fear. Joy of this present moment. Fear of losing this moment. So everything that shapes this moment is made up of these two emotions, joy and fear. While joy belongs to the present moment, fear belongs to the future. And this is how this moment is built up in front of us. Then we began to write. Short sentence, full stop. and then continues. And as we see in other dramatic monologues too, we have a lot of enjambment here where the sentence doesn't end where the line does. So here we have that continuation. See, my soul smoothed itself out a long cramped scroll. So although this has a rhyming pattern, we feel as if we are listening to somebody talking in regular prose and not rhymes. My soul smoothed itself out. So when they started to have their ride, he started to feel refreshed. And he compares his soul to a long, cramped scroll. You know what a scroll is? It's like rolled up parchments where in ancient times things were written down. He doesn't use the word paper, he uses the word scroll, maybe to generate that effect of that ancient rolled up manuscripts. So that scroll, when you open it, it is creased at many places. And if you hold it against a rushing wind, then that crease gets smoother. In his case, he feels that ride has opened up his soul like a scroll. And whatever was written there, it's getting smoothed out. The worries, the tension, the fear that he had felt throughout. And at the same time, when the scroll is smoothed out, he can see what is written there more clearly. And what is written on our souls, our memories, and in this case, the memories of this life he has spent with her. So this whole idea is very beautifully presented in front of us. Past hopes already lay behind. What need to strive with a life awry? So we can imagine him like holding this paper, which is his soul, and at one moment maybe he lets go of it. And then he looks at that and says that there my past is lying away from me now. So this is the dramatic quality about this poem. You can actually see them moving about, experiencing things, action on stage through lines of the lyrics. So that is the speciality of dramatic monologue here. He feels that there's no point thinking about things that has happened before. Had I said that, had I done this, so might I gain, so might I miss. See, after somebody has a breakup, they end up thinking, what did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong? He says there's no point thinking about those things because even if I did something right, there's no guarantee that this wouldn't have happened. So there's no point lingering in the past. Might she have loved me? Just as well, she might have hated. Who can tell? At least she's not hating me. We can, of course, see that there might be some reason. Maybe they have fallen out of love. Maybe she has some compulsion from her family. We don't know the reason of her rejection. But we at least know that there is no hatred between them. Then she wouldn't have agreed to go on a ride with him. So he has this consolation that at least she doesn't hate me. Where had I been now if the worst befell? So that is the worst thing possible, that she would hate me. What would I have done now? If she had hated me, at least I have this ride with me. And here we are riding, she and I. So he has created this moment for us, and then he begins to talk about failure and success. Fail I alone in words and deeds? Words means things we say we will be doing, and deeds are things we actually do. And more often than not, we end up saying things which we cannot live up to. We promise things to our friends, our lovers, our parents, and then we see that we cannot accomplish those things. Because dreams are often bigger than what we can achieve. So he says that, am I the only one who fails? Why? All men strive, and who succeeds? There is no end to success. The moment you feel that you're successful, you have already started to have a dream where you get something more for yourself. So it's a never-ending process. We wrote. It seemed my spirit flew, saw other regions, cities new. So he now tries to focus on what his body is feeling at the moment, and he feels that he is sublimated. He is getting rid of his body. He can feel his soul, and he feels as if they are seeing the whole world as if in a time lapse. They are moving in slow motion, the world is zooming past them. So that's the kind of picture he forms in front of us. But this word seemed is very tricky here. We'll come to it later, I promise. As the world rushed by on either side, I thought, all labor, yet no less bear up beneath their unsuccess. So everybody works hard who has a dream, but there's no guarantee of success anywhere. Look at the end of work, contrast the petty done, the undone vast. This is a beautiful line. Undone vast. Undone is the world of imagination. What we have as the ideal world, the utopia, and what we achieve is the small little thing. On one hand, we have Tennyson's Ulysses talking about not accepting his fate, challenging his fate. Not to yield is his key word. There he says that I will drink life to the lees. I don't care what I achieve. I'll have to dream on. So two conflicting ideas here we see. Here he is saying that I know that I'm not the only one who fails. Everybody fails. This present of theirs with the hopeful past. I hoped she would love me. Here we write. So he had high hopes and he has not met any success. And he accepts this as the natural thing in the world because it happens to everybody. People usually say in these situations, why me? Why only me? Why doesn't this happen to somebody else? But he says this happens to everybody else. And then he says, it's fine with me then. What hand and brain went ever paired? What heart alike conceived and dared? What act proved all its thought had been? What will but felt the fleshly screen? The same application of anaphora again. What? So that same built up of momentum here, a climactic way of telling that human beings have always had this gap between what they think they can do and what they end up doing, between hand and brain. So while the Renaissance man would have said that we dare to do more than we dream of because human beings are synonymous to possibilities, and on the other hand we have this Victorian doubt about how far man can go, we have this middle ground where he says that we dream and then we get some. We don't get everything. And this man appears to be quite realistic too. We ride and I see her bosom heave. So because they are on horseback or in a carriage driven by a horse, her body is moving in rhythm and he describes it. So he was kind of lost in his thoughts and suddenly he noticed her and then just one line on her and then he comes back to his own thoughts again. There's many a crown for who can reach 10 lines, a statesman's life in each. So what happens when a royal person dies, a statesman dies? He gets 10 lines on his gravestone. Elegy written on a country churchyard has a beautiful description of how it doesn't matter whether you are a statesman or a poet or a soldier, you all come to the same end. And then it says, the flag stuck on a heap of bones, a soldier's doing. What atones? They scratch his name on the abbess stones. My writing is better by their leave. At least at this moment I am not dead. At this moment I can feel the sensations. When I die, I die. So how does it matter if I have achieved something? Because at the end, it's going to be all same for everybody. That's a bit dark, I know. Then he specifically addresses the poet. Which poet? There is no poet there. He is thinking that he is talking to a poet or about a poet. What does it all mean, poet? Well, your brains beat into rhythm. So this you is not you and me, okay? Till now, he was talking to the mistress, and then when the riding started, they probably just rode silently while he was thinking, and now he is thinking again, but he is imagining a conversation with a poet. So he speaks to this imaginary poet in his head and says, well, your brains beat into rhythm. Poets, they make poetry, rhythmic things. You tell what we felt only. So you write poems on moments like this. So this is strange because this narrator is talking about poet who talks about a moment like this in poetry. So this narrator is talking about Browning here. So Browning is what? Making a dig at himself. He has this very twisted sense of humor, Robert Browning. So he says that you can only write, I can feel, so I am superior to you. So he's talking about the poet being the inferior person here. You expressed, you hold things beautiful the best, and paste them in rhyme so side by side, till something Nate is much, but then have you yourself what's best for men? Have you yourself felt these things? Have you yourself understood what beauty is? You've just written about them. This is very dark if you consider this in context of being a post-romantic poetry, because romantic poets, they always said that it is more important to imagine things than actually feel them. For them, the world of imagination was of greater importance than the world of reality. For Robert Browning, reality was paramount, reality was supreme, and actual sensual experience was the keynote of his poetry. The only romantic who came closest to Browning in this was John Keats. And the lines which come here right after this are very interesting, especially because I have mentioned Keats right now. Are you poor, sick, old, or your time? Before your time, you grow old, you get sick. Who is he talking about? Anybody, any poet. But if you ask me, I would say he definitely had John Keats in mind, because all these three things come together in that man: poor, sick, and old before time. He actually writes in Nightingale about how he sees every day young men die before time, where youth grows old and spectre thin and dies. And then he says, nearer one wit your own sublime. So he says, have you yourself what's best for men? Are you nearer one wit your own sublime? So have you reached that point about which you wrote? About what Keats wrote? He wrote about immortality. He wrote about reaching that point of permanence, reaching that point of truth. Beauty is truth, truth, beauty. And then Browning says, did you reach your sublime, your ideal, any closer than us? He feels that in this ride, he is able to reach that moment of sublime more than that poet can. Than we who never have turned a rhyme. Now, interestingly, this narrator is quite good at turning these imagery and metaphors into his thoughts, and we see poetic element in the way he talks. But he says that he has never turned a rhyme, although this whole speech is a poem. Sing, Riding's a joy. For me, I ride. So I ride for myself. The poet writes, I don't know, for others. For him, this moment belongs to him and he enjoys it because he likes to do this. Then he talks about, or rather to, this sculptor. Sculptor is somebody who builds statues. And you, great sculptor, so you gave a score of years to art, her slave, and that's your Venus. So there is this sculptor who has prepared or made this beautiful statue of Venus. Venus is the goddess of beauty, supposed to be very good looking. And then he says, whence we turn to yonder girl that fords the barn. So if there's a statue of Venus in front of us and there's this woman, just a random girl there, yonder means there, whom we can see in front of us crossing the stream, we would rather look at that girl because that girl belongs to the world of reality and reality is important. That girl belongs to present. The statue of Venus, no matter how beautiful it is, that is dead. That doesn't have life in it. Very similar ideas are given by Keats in Ode on a Grecian Urn, where he uses the word cold pastoral. That the figures painted on that urn, they might be beautiful, exquisite, but they cannot have life. The lover there cannot kiss his love. So somehow this idea that real life is more worthy, that came in the poetry of John Keats too towards the end, when in autumn he realizes the importance of fulfillment rather than permanence. And he says, thou hast thy music too. Here we see Browning's narrator saying, you acquiesce, and shall I repine? Should I regret that I am failing here? You have also failed, because nobody will look at your statue if a real girl is seen there. What man of music? Now he talks about the musician. You grown grey with notes and nothing else to say, because he's talking about musician here. He's deliberately using a lot of alliteration, which is kind of musical in its way. So he says grown grey and notes and nothing to emphasize alliterative words. Is this your sole praise from a friend? Greatly his opera strains intend, but in music we know how fashions end. So the compliments that a musician receives from his friend are something like this, that he has great music, he makes great music, but times change, and with time taste of music changes, or people begin to like different kinds of music. So what is trending today might not be trending tomorrow. It never is. So nothing is permanent in this world, not even success in music industry. I gave my youth, but we ride in fine. So just like these people, the sculptor, the poet, the musician, this person has also devoted his youth to this woman, to this relationship, and he has failed. So what? Everybody fails. That's his point. Who knows what's fit for us? Had fate proposed bliss here, should sublimate my being, had I signed the bond. Now he's trying to imagine a situation where he would have had her as his companion forever. Suppose they got married. Then what would have happened? He's now talking that. He's now saying about that. Had fate proposed bliss here, should sublimate my being, had I signed the bond. So if I entered into that agreement of being with her forever, still one must lead some life beyond, have a bliss to die with, dim descried. So if I had a life with this woman, then when I would die, I would be so scared, because nothing would be better than being with her. And if I die, I will stop having that happiness. But if I am not with her, look at the peculiar logic here. If I am not with her during lifetime, when I reach the end of my life, I will look forward to death, thinking that maybe after death I will get her. So my life will be an ordinary thing. So I will have hope of getting good things in heaven. But if I get her here, then heaven will be a sadder place than this earth. This foot once planted on the goal, this glory garland round my soul, could I descry such? Try and test. So what could be better than having her? So if I have her now, what will I have in heaven? I sink back shuddering from the quest. I would be so scared of the whole idea. Earth being so good, would heaven seem best? No, heaven and she are beyond this ride. At this moment, I know that she is beyond my reach. Heaven is beyond my reach. So there is a possibility that after I die, heaven and she both will be mine. So that's his logic. That's his consolation, I guess. So he will have a more hopeful death because she has decided to be away from him now. So we come back to this woman now, who is a very conventional silent listener, disturbing, almost like Da Vinci's Mona Lisa. What's going on in her mind? How is she reacting to this silent companion who is going on thinking things? And yet she has not spoke so long. What if heaven be that, fair and strong at life's best, with our eyes upturned, whither life's flower is first discerned? We fixed so. So he is saying that heaven is very much like that, fair and strong and like this best moment of my life. So this moment is like a heaven for me. He's saying that we fixed so, ever should so abide. So this moment when they are together, this moment is going to last them in their memories. What if we still ride on, we too, with life forever old yet new? So what if we don't stop riding? What if we go on? Changed not in kind but in degree, the instant made eternity. In kind and in degree, when he deliberately uses these expressions, I think about Coleridge's words about secondary imagination, that in imagination, especially in case of primary imagination, you imagine things, fine. You imagine something as something else, or you imagine a situation. In secondary imagination, your faculties work in the same way. Your power works in the same way. But in degrees, it is greater. So, imagination is a capability of the brain, and in primary and secondary, the only difference is in degrees, how much more intense you are. So, he says that their life on this horse ride, in this moment, this can transform into an imaginative life, changed in degrees, which means on an elevated level, on a higher level of imagination. So the same person who was till now saying that the ideal world is not a good thing, the real experience is good, is now desperately trying to hold on to the idea that if this moment can be idealized or somehow transported to a world of imagination, then this could go on forever. Because in real life, this will not go on forever. The instant made eternity. And heaven just proved that I and she ride right together, forever ride. When I look at this expression, what if heaven be that fair and strong? I'm reminded of Marvel's Coy Mistress. You have probably read the poem in your first or second semesters, where he says, let us roll all our strength and all our sweetness up into one ball. Carpe diem. Seize the moment. That is the basic theme of that poem by Marvel. So when we see that he's talking about fair and strong together, united, is of course talking about the archetypical male strength and the archetypical female fairness, bringing them together just as Marvel did. And then it makes me feel that this poem is also about carpe diem, isn't it? Seize the day, capture the moment, live the life to the fullest. But what was Marvel's poem about? He wanted his beloved to agree or give consent for having sex with him. Similarly, riding has this undercurrent, this sublingual meaning of being associated with the act of coition, the act of sexual intimacy. And I never saw any horse in the poem. Especially this expression, the instant made eternity. This kind of goes along better with the idea of a sexual climax or that moment of physical liberation than a horse ride, which kind of takes up not just one moment, but quite some time, a duration rather. Another thing that I feel is that this word ride has metaphoric significance too. When he was talking about this poet, he had said that they have never turned a rhyme and they're riding on horseback. Let's assume they're riding on horseback. So this riding makes them have a rhythm. And that rhythm is real poetry of life. Now these undercurrents of sexually charged meanings, they have been part of critical discourse. People have actually written about them in essays. But I think that what matters here is not the reality of the ride itself, but how this man negotiates with the idea of failure. That there are other possible ways to counteract the feeling of depression, dejection that one usually feels with breakups. If you look at the form and meter, of course, it's a dramatic monologue. We have discussed that already. Structurally, this poem is very strange. It has a very strange rhyme scheme. All the 10 stanzas, they have 11 lines each. And if you look at the rhyme scheme, you would notice it's like A, A, B, B, C, D, D, E, 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 C. So first, we begin to feel that there is a proper rhyming couplet scheme here, just like we saw in My Last Touches. Then, at the end of the 6th line, we feel that, okay, there is no matching word. And the C, that is the 5th line, remains hanging there without any mate, you can say. But when the stanza finally ends on the 10th line, C finally gets its match. Let me show you how. In the first stanza, the 5th line ends with B and the last line ends with me. So be me. Then again, in the 2nd stanza, write tonight. So be me, write tonight. Alright. Then we come to the next stanza. Best breast. Alright, I. Side, ride. And this goes on. So it is as if the rhyming pattern gives a hint that just like the C rhymes, they are also separated but together. And from a different perspective, you can say that C shouldn't despair because C will find its match when the stanza ends, or this speaker will find his beloved when life ends. So with Browning, you never know the depths of his thoughts when he writes things, and he takes rhyme schemes quite seriously. So this poem begins in media res and it kind of ends on a conclusive note. It can be said that it's a poem of failure and also a poem of experience, because failure is the only experience we have, and every success is failure when you compare it to the next success one has. So, do you find this poem upsetting, sad? Or do you think this lover has somehow realized that the one moment we have is the present moment, and what we make of it defines us, and to make the most of it is worthwhile after all? And this is not just some British Victorian sentiment, it is something very universal. This urge to seize the moment, this need for carpe diem. It's like those lines, हमको मिली है आज ये घड़ियां नसीब से, जी भर के देख लीजिए हमको करीब से, फिर आपके नसीब में ये बात हो ना हो, शायद फिर इस जन्म में मुलाकात हो ना हो. You know the song, right? Okay, so I'll catch you in my next video. I am Monami Mukherjee signing off. Thank you all for being here with me, and don't forget to subscribe to stay connected with us. So till our next video, stay happy, stay safe. Bye-bye.